Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, and we're going to be doing a sit-down, dedicated sort of book review to The Housemaid's Secret by Frieda McFadden. The Housemaid's Secret is the follow-up novel to Frieda McFadden's wildly successful The Housemaid, which was very, very popular last year, and this year she put out a sequel to it. If you have been following my channel and keeping up with me, you probably know I loved The Housemaid last year. It was one of my favorite thriller books that came out last year. It was one of my favorite thriller books that I read last year. I certainly don't think this is a literary masterpiece by any means, but it's a very fun popcorn thriller that I could not put down and I really enjoyed. So I did something that I very rarely do, and I picked up the sequel. And today I'm going to be telling you all about it and let you know if it is worth picking up or if it is something that you can skip. I will be talking about spoilers for both of these books throughout the video, but you are still able to watch this if you do not want any spoilers at all and you just generally want to hear about the books in the series. So I will have timestamps down below indicating when I am talking about spoilers. So if you do not want spoilers for either The Housemaid or The Housemaid's Secret or both, you will be able to skip over those sections and just hear my non-spoilery thoughts. First, I'm going to start by setting you up for what this series is about, starting with The Housemaid. In The Housemaid, you are following a character named Millie, who is a maid. She is down on her luck. She is not having a great time finding a job because of her dark, mysterious past, but she ends up coming across this opportunity to work for this family. She's going to be moving into their home and helping clean around the house, helping pick up their kid from school, preparing their food and whatnot. It seems like a good gig, but things start to get very weird in the house. It seems like Millie is developing a strained relationship with the wife and the husband, and there's clearly something dark going on in that household. And then you get a perspective shift in the book and you get the wife's perspective, and you find out that actually all along Millie was being sort of double-crossed by the wife. The wife was intentionally trying to bring Millie into the house to be a replacement for her because she does have a very abusive husband who will lock her in this room and just really punish her and abuse her a lot. And she knew that the only way she was going to get away from her abusive husband is if she found a new fixation for him. So she brought Millie in to replace her so that she could get away from her abusive husband, which sucks. But what the wife didn't know when she was doing that is what Millie's past was. It turns out that Millie has a past for being willing to harm men to protect women. She has previously gone to jail for killing a man who she killed when he was assaulting her friend, and Millie does find herself in the situation where the abusive husband does get her confined, but Millie fights back. She ends up killing the abusive husband, and the book ends on this note of knowing that she's going to continue this pattern of doing this. She's going to start being recommended as a maid who can come in and help women get away from their abusive husbands, whether that means killing them or, just helping them run away. So that is the summary of what happens in The Housemaid. And then The Housemaid's Secret follows up on that story several years in the future. This could technically be read as a standalone because there's nothing significant from the last book that is like critical to know to be able to understand this book. It gives you little bits of context so you understand who these characters are that are making a reappearance, but it really could be read as a standalone if you wanted, but I would not recommend that, and I'm going to get into that when I talk about my thoughts about the book. But first, let me tell you what this one is about. So in a non-spoilery way, this will not spoil the contents of this book or the previous book in the series. In this story, you're following a character named Millie, who you saw in the first book. She is a housemaid, and she is taking up this job working for this rich couple in New York. She is cleaning their house, cooking their meals, running errands for them, and she mainly reports to the husband Douglas, and his wife Wendy is pretty MIA. She is always in the guest bedroom and the door is closed, and Millie will hear her crying, and Millie's instructed not to really talk to her or bother her because the husband tells her that Wendy has this chronic pain condition and Millie just should not bother her. But the longer Millie is working in the house, the more she starts to grow concerned for Wendy's well-being, and then she finds herself getting in the middle of a mess. Now I'm going to go into spoilers for this book, so if you want to skip this section, if you don't want to know the spoilers because you're planning on reading it or I don't know, you just don't want to know spoilers, you can skip to the next part. So whether you read the first book in the series or not, you are familiar with Millie's character and this understanding of what she has done in her past by the time you get to this book, which is that she has this reputation for going and working for these families and helping women get out of abusive situations with their husbands by either murdering them or helping them run away or helping them get lawyers. She is kind of known around this community to be recommended to other women when they need help getting out of their marriage. And so when she's coming into this family, starting to clean for this family, and she starts to suspect Wendy may be being abused by her husband, she suspects, oh, I must have been recommended for this job and Wendy needs my help getting out of the marriage. And so she forms a relationship with Wendy and tells her like, hey, I'm willing to help you get out of this. And Wendy is very scared because she's like, my husband's so rich, he's so powerful, he'll find me, there's no way I can get away. But Millie's like, I've done this before, I can definitely help you out. Meanwhile, what's also going on in Millie's life is that she is dating this guy named Brock. He is very interested in settling down and being married, but they're only like 6 months into their relationship and Millie is just not really there with him. So he's kind of like a background character floating around. Millie is also living in this apartment that is not in the best neighborhood and she's always kind of nervous when she is going back there, and she's got this like abusive guy who lives in her building. And then also, as Millie has been wandering around living her life, she keeps feeling like someone is watching her. And so all this is sort of the buildup in the first part of this book as Millie is having all of those issues going on and also getting to know Wendy and trying to make a plan to help Wendy get out of her marriage. It turns out the person that was watching Millie was Enzo, which is her ex-boyfriend and which is a character that you see in the first book. He was the landscaper in the first book for the family that she was working for at the time. And you learn that in between the two books, Millie and Enzo dated for a while. They would kind of work jobs together, help women get out of abusive relationships together. But then Enzo had to go back home to Italy to take care of his ailing mother, and he just never ended up returning. He stayed there for over a year, so they did break up, and that is why Millie has now moved on with Brock. But it turns out Enzo's mom died, and so he has come back to the States, and he's just kind of secretly been watching Millie, playing her bodyguard, trying to protect her, which is kind of really weird, but we're gonna look past it for the sake of the book. I'll get into my full thoughts of how I feel about this in the next section, but I want to get through all the spoilers of what happens in the book first in case you just want to get caught up on what happened. This book does a similar thing to the first book in which you have a POV shift, and then we shift to the POV of Wendy and we learn what's really been going on. It turns out that Wendy was not being abused physically by her husband Douglas. She was just trying to get him murdered so that she could steal all his money. So she had brought Millie into this situation and was making it look like her husband was abusing her so that she could get Millie to kill her husband so that she could collect all of his funds. The background that you learn on Wendy's character is that she has been married to Douglas for 4 years. Previously, she grew up pretty poor. Douglas is extremely rich and she kind of liked him at first, and it was never really genuine love, but she was willing to try to make it work. But as the years went on in their marriage, she continually lost interest in him, mostly relating to his physical appearance and his lack of interest in wealth. So Wendy is just not a great girl. During the course of her marriage, she was telling him like, okay, we can try for kids, but it turns out she actually knows that she is not going to be able to carry children. And then he finds out she was lying to him about that, and they get in this big fight, and she wants to get a divorce because she thinks she's going to get a $10 million payout in their divorce because of the language of their prenup. But he is like, you don't get that money if I have evidence that you cheated on me, and she was cheating on him. This is where it's about to get a little bit complicated. But Wendy was cheating on her husband Douglas with this guy named Russell, who was married to this woman named Mary Beth, who was Douglas's assistant. Also conveniently, Russell and Douglas look very similar, except Russell is apparently slightly more thin and handsome. So when all this was revealed that she was cheating on him and she wasn't gonna get any money in the divorce, she refused to divorce Douglas, but they kind of were separated and they were living in separate places because they have this penthouse in New York and then they have this home in Long Island as well. So he was staying in the Long Island home, she was living in the penthouse, and then she concocted this master plan. Because Russell looks similar enough to her husband, she decided to pretend that he was her husband, brought Millie in, and the guy that Millie has been interacting with is actually Russell, but she just thought it was Douglas. So Wendy has been faking abuse, Russell has been faking to be Douglas and to be abusive, and Millie has been totally fooled, had the wool pulled over her eyes. Why this all matters is because Millie did try to help Wendy escape her abusive husband as far as Millie was understanding, and she took Wendy way out to this motel in the middle of nowhere, and she was gonna be picked up by her friend and she was helping her get away. But then the next day, Wendy calls Millie and says, he brought me back, he was waiting for me, he found me, I knew he would, and now I'm back, you have to come over here. And Millie, of course, panics, so she goes back over to their apartment, and when she arrives, who she thinks is Douglas is choking Wendy and he won't stop. And so Millie goes and gets this gun that previously Wendy had shown her. There was a gun hidden in the house. Millie gets the gun and she shoots who she believes to be Douglas, but it's actually Russell, and it's actually just a blank, so he's not actually gonna die, but they make it look like he dies. So Millie thinks, oh my gosh, I killed Douglas. But then they have this agreement between her and Wendy where they're like, it's okay, she's gonna claim self-defense, you can go away, Millie, you won't be involved, everything's gonna be okay, thank you so much for saving my life. Millie's been through this a couple times, she's like, cool, that sounds good, I'm gonna go back to my life. But then the cops come to Millie's door and they are telling her that she is being accused of murdering Douglas by Wendy. So that's when Millie realizes that she has been double-crossed by Wendy in some way. And then all the details and all the revelations come out of everything that was planned. For a couple other small details of things that happen in the course of the book, her boyfriend Brock, Millie's boyfriend Brock, is an attorney. And so when she's getting called into the police station and being questioned, and she realizes that she is the suspect of a murder, she calls Brock to come in to be her attorney. But she's been hiding her entire past from Brock, and so she's really nervous about it, but she's like, I don't know, I need an attorney, I'm gonna call him. He gets in there, he learns everything about her past because they're obviously questioning her and saying like, you've been to prison for murdering someone. He's like, oh my gosh, what do you mean? I did not know that about you. He gets really upset. They think she was having an affair with Douglas. He thinks she was having an affair with Douglas. He breaks up with her. He exits the room. After they break up, Enzo has obviously been kind of around in Millie's life. She calls him to kind of help her, and they end up getting back together really at the end of the book, but they're kind of like working together throughout the rest of the book. And Enzo is the one who helps Millie uncover what Wendy was doing, the fact that she was bringing Russell in to pretend to be Douglas, the fact that Russell is actually still alive and Millie didn't kill anyone at all, and the whole reasoning for why Wendy was trying to kill Douglas. And by the way, Wendy did kill Douglas. I forgot to say that as well. It's a pretty complicated scheme to explain in a simple way. But essentially what Wendy did was she brought Russell in to pretend to be Douglas so that Millie would kill him, so that Millie thought she killed Douglas and that she could pin it all on Millie. But Millie shot Russell, didn't actually kill him, and then Wendy wanted Russell to kill Douglas, but Russell freaked out, so Wendy herself was the one who actually killed Douglas, and really Millie did nothing wrong. So after all this happens, Wendy thinks that Millie is going to go to jail. They think the cops are on to her, that she's gonna get away with it. So Wendy and Russell are off celebrating at this cabin that Russell and his wife Mary Beth owned, having champagne, taking baths. Russell is actually a nervous wreck because he feels bad about all these things that happen, so he's like crying in the bathtub. And then Wendy gets a call, so she goes out to take the call, and it's actually her husband's attorney and best friend Joe who was calling her to say, hey bitch, guess what, clearly you tried to kill him and take all his money, but actually you don't get any of his money because he just changed his will last month and all of his money is going to charity and you are not getting anything, so you're gonna have to leave the penthouse and you get nothing. And then Wendy's like, oh crap, I did all of this and now I get nothing. And then she gets another call and it is the cops. And she thinks, okay, well, at least they're gonna get Millie. But then the cops are like, actually, we're not going to be getting Millie because, and this is more detail than you really need, but because there is a camera in the back of your apartment building, because she had Russell coming in and out of the back of the building to not be on camera, so they didn't know things were happening. Anyway, blah, 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 boring police details. Basically, they're like, we kind of know that you killed your husband and you better be afraid because we're gonna come get you. Then Wendy hears Russell screaming in the bathtub. She goes to find him. His throat is slit. He is dead. And then the power goes out. So she thinks Millie has come to get her revenge and that Millie is coming to murder her. But it turns out it's not Millie. It is Mary Beth, which is Russell's wife, who has come to do the killing. And she drugged Wendy's wine with these pills that were heart medication that Douglas took. But actually, guess what? Also, Brock took those same heart pills. Brock is Millie's ex-boyfriend, if you forgot, and that was a very minor detail that was told really early in the story. And really, it was Millie giving Brock's pills to Mary Beth to help Mary Beth kill Wendy. So Mary Beth does kill Wendy, they're dead, and Millie is able to get away with it all. By the end of the story, Millie has gotten away from this horrible situation. She's back with Enzo, they're moving in together, and she ends up going and talking to the cop who was accusing her of murdering Douglas again, and the cop tells her like, hey, I kind of know what you have a reputation for, and I'm willing to be a resource to you should you ever need it. Here's my number. And that is a wrap on everything that happens in The Housemaid's Secret. Okay, now that I've gotten through full spoilers, it was a lot more than I even remembered it being. There were a lot of little things and little intricacies that I had to explain. But now that I've gotten through full spoilers, I'm gonna tell you my thoughts on this book, what I liked, what I didn't like, my rating for it, and if I think it is worth picking up after reading The Housemaid, or if you could even pick it up by itself. Starting with what I liked about The Housemaid's Secret, I liked pretty much all the same things about this book that I liked about the first book in the series. And the biggest thing for that is the pace. This was such a fast-paced popcorn thriller that was so easy to fly through. I finished this book in just 2 sittings. I could not stop reading it. It is just so compulsively readable, and I love having that experience with a thriller. So even if it is not the most groundbreaking story, even if the characters aren't fully developed, even if the plot's kind of stupid, I just like having a good time. And so if I'm flying through a fast-paced book, then I'm enjoying my time with it. This book was also pretty twisty with some fun reveals. There were some things that I saw coming, and there were some things that I did not see coming. And generally, I really liked the tense atmosphere that this book developed, especially in the beginning part of the book when Millie is first going to work for this family and she does not know what is happening in this house. Now for the things that I did not like as much, there are a couple things. One is that the first big twist that happens in this book was very predictable to me because it's not that different from the first book in the terms of the nature of it, and there's even some things this book does that mirrors the first book. So I just didn't think that was a good big gotcha moment because you're kind of primed for that knowing what you knew from the first book, and it just wasn't really that surprising. I will say there was another big twist that happened a little later in the book that was surprising to me and that did get me, so kind of evens out. There were some things that I definitely saw coming, there were some things that I didn't see coming, but that first twist in particular, the whole time you're reading the beginning of the book, you're like, is this gonna do the same kind of thing over again? I kind of think it might, and then it does. Another thing that I didn't love in this book is there are a couple really small tiny details that created these moments that were overly convenient for the purpose of moving the plot forward, and that typically doesn't bother me too much in books because I know thrillers are probably like really hard to write and things sometimes do have to conveniently work themselves out so that the author can get to the next spot, but there were like really specific small detail things where I was like, obviously this is like a really heavy-handed foreshadowing moment here that for some reason these things have to be connected, and I don't know, it was just like a little too in your face for me. I also thought after part 1 this book kind of fell apart for me because part 1 built such great tension, and then everything that happened from that point on kept continually kind of losing me, and the parts kept getting shorter and shorter, and it felt like it was just kind of rushing itself, and the overall pacing was fast to read, but in terms of how the plot advances, it like sped up too much at the end, and then everything was just happening, and there wasn't a lot of tension left in the story. And then there were also some things in this book that I just didn't understand why they were a part of the book. Like there's this whole storyline with this abusive man that lives in Millie's building in the beginning that didn't really have much of an impact on the story. Millie's boyfriend at the start of this book, Brock, felt kind of useless in the story. There's just some things that felt like they were playing a big part of the book without having an actual impact in the story, so that felt a little bit off to me. And just generally, this book didn't feel as surprising as the first book did. So by this point, you're probably realizing I did not like The Housemaid's Secret as much as I enjoyed The Housemaid. I think if I went back and read The Housemaid, I probably wouldn't love it as much on a reread, obviously. I think it was just a fun, fast-paced time. It had a big surprise, it had a big twist. Also, I do know now, since I have originally read the book, a lot of people say this is like eerily similar to the book The Last Mrs. Parrish, but I've never read that book, so this just felt really fun and fresh and new to me. I know that might not be the case for everyone since it's apparently very similar to a thriller that came out several years prior, but for me personally, because I haven't read that book, this was just a fun, unpredictable, enjoyable time. This one did not quite live up to the first book for me personally. I still had a good time with it because it was just such a fast-paced read, but I think one of the biggest weak points of this book is you don't really get Millie's character as much as you do in the first book. Millie is obviously the main character of the book, but the first book is so interesting because Millie has this dark, mysterious past and you don't really know things about her, and throughout the book you're uncovering like how tough she is and how much she's willing to do to help protect other women. You already know that going into the second book, and I feel like you don't learn anything new about Millie in this book. A lot of the book is also taken up with some romance elements, either between the boyfriend that she starts the book with or when her ex-boyfriend Enzo comes into the picture. And I just felt like you weren't seeing Millie be the badass that you know she can be, especially after the first book. You were really just watching her be pretty naive, which felt strange because of all the experience that you know she has. It is weird to see her be so naive in this situation after all the things you know about her. So if you were considering picking this book up, because it could be read as a standalone if you wanted to, I really don't think you're going to like this as much without understanding everything you do about Millie from the first book. The first book is what makes Millie interesting. This just feels kind of like a spin-off, and I was really hoping for more from this book. I was really hoping that we would see Millie in a new light, that we would see her have a lot of power, and like, I don't know, I thought it would be very different, but it ended up feeling just really similar to the first book without as much depth to her character, which was pretty disappointing to me. But all of this to say, I know I'm talking about a lot of negatives, I did still enjoy the book. It was fun, it was fast paced, I flew through it, and I ended up giving it a 3.5 star rating because having a fun time is enough for me sometimes. I'm not always looking for the next literary masterpiece in a thriller. I'm just looking to have a good time, to be surprised by things, and I read it super fast, I had fun, and there were some surprises throughout this book. One in particular that as soon as it was revealed, I was like, literally, how are they going to explain this? That is wild. What is the situation here? And I like to have a moment like that when I'm reading a thriller. So it didn't completely disappoint me. It's just that I had pretty high expectations and I was hoping for something that felt really new off of this story. If you're gonna write a sequel, I want it to feel like a worthy sequel. I want it to feel like it has a place in telling a new part of this character's story. And I don't feel like we got a new story from Millie. I feel like we just kind of saw her revert a little bit, which was a strange experience for a sequel. So in terms of should you pick this book up or not, I would say if you enjoyed The Housemaid and you're interested in seeing more of Millie and you like Frieda McFadden's writing, sure, you're probably going to end up pretty similar to me and at least be like a 3-star or above. But if you're not particularly interested in picking up the sequel, if you're not really a sequel person, I don't think you're missing anything huge by not picking up this book. I think you're going to be just fine. So that is it for my full thoughts on The Housemaid's Secret and The Housemaid as well. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read these books, particularly if you checked out the sequel, and what your thoughts were about the book. Let me know if you agree with any of my takes or if you disagree with anything and you had a completely different experience with the book. We can discuss that all down below. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!